Episode number 47 of Making the Case. The story of the melanated man and woman. You definitely don't want to miss this one. Let's get it. Hey, welcome back to another episode of Making the Case. Episode number 47. I am your host, Dr. Jacob Isom, educator, author, speaker, entrepreneur, historian, father, content creator, a little bit of everything. All right. Hey, got another great episode for you. Before I get into anything, I gotta go over my two channel norms. One, we attack points and not people. And two, we don't do any cussing or derogatory stuff because we are professional over here. Okay. I haven't done this in a long time, so I have to do it. For those of you that's just checking out the channel, making the cases where I take a topic or a question and I provide you with research, data, facts, statistics on that topic to make my case, whether yay or nay. Okay. So that's just a little bit of background on what we do over here. Okay. But as I stated in the intro, man, this is a powerful episode, man. So we're gonna go ahead and get into my opening statement. But what I must say and should say is there's going to be, and I hope I don't get flagged for this video. There's going to be a lot of words that are being said that I wouldn't normally say. I'm going to say the N word probably quite a few times, but it's definitely in context into what we're doing in today's episode. So today's episode is the story of the melanated man and woman, and we're going to kind of break down that story. Of course, this is coming from my let's say academic standpoint. I can easily do a 2-hour video on this topic. So but this video will probably be a little bit longer than usual because it's just so many different points that I want to bring up and show you. We definitely will have more than 3 pieces of evidence to why the melanated man and woman came to be what we are today. And what I will say is that, being an almost 45-year-old man, that I've literally lived and experienced and observed and witnessed the evolution of melanated people. Now, I say melanated people for a reason because what we're going to address in today's episode is how we came to be called Black, how we came to be called African American, how we came to be called Negro, right? So we're going to address the story, and this is the reason why I titled the episode I did, the story of melanated people. Okay. So it's going to be a fascinating episode. Definitely make sure you check out the whole episode because we're going to get into a lot of history in this. I know in some episodes we get into a lot of science. This episode is going to be dominated by historical facts for you to check out. And I would suggest you definitely read upon even more after this episode. If you're curious about anything that we discuss in this episode, I definitely encourage you to, do a little digging, do a little more research. Okay. So like I said, the title of this, the story of melanated people, or I should say the story of melanated men and women, but I do like the story of melanated people. That kind of rings a bell. Okay. So sit back, relax, get your popcorn, and we're going to get this show on the roll because we got a lot of information to throw at you. Okay. So without further ado, let's kind of get into our first piece of evidence. All right. This show is going to be a little bit different. But we still got pieces of evidence that I'm gonna present to you to kind of make the case of the story of melanated people. Okay. All right. So without further ado, let's get into it. All right, so let's get into it. Technically, this is my first piece of evidence, but today's episode is going to be a little bit different. So what I decided to do is, and I'm hoping I'm not insulting anybody. Tell this, I know I have a very smart audience, but I want to define what melanin means. So if I'm going to say melanated people, I have to make sure that you understand what it is that I'm talking about. Okay. So, a real simple definition, this comes from dictionary.com, of melanin or melanated is a dark brown to black pigment occurring in the hair, skin, and iris of the eye in people and animals. It is responsible for tanning of skin exposed to sunlight. Okay. So, there where you see the definition of melanin, of being melanated. Okay, so typically we talking about people with darker skin, uh, whether you call that African American, black, but of course that's also includes Hispanics and those Indians. Those are dark hue. Now, let me say this before we move on. We understand that everybody has melanin. Okay, it's just that um, black people, African American, etc., have more melanin, right? There's also something called neuromelanin, which is melanin that is located in the brain. Okay. So the melanin that is responsible for your eye and things of that nature, that will be located in the brain. Okay. So and that's why I was saying that please, please, please make sure you're doing your research. Because don't take me for face value, because I take nothing for face value. Okay. So I just wanted to make sure that we're on the same page when it comes to understanding what melanin means. So everybody has melanin. It is, of course, some people have more melanin than others. But melanin is definitely responsible for pigmentation, eye color, and things of that nature. Some will even say it's also responsible for intelligence. All right. Um, I haven't done a lot of research on that. But if you would like me to, definitely let me know. Okay. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna continue to create this story of the melanated people. I just first wanted you to see what it is that I'm addressing by providing you with that definition. Okay. So let's move on to a very powerful piece of text that I want to read to you. Let's get it. All right. So, our next piece of evidence, or our next piece in the story of melanated people, is, of course, we can't tell the story of melanated people without addressing slavery. Right. Now, the crazy thing about it is we can't tell a story about any people without bringing up slavery, because it literally impacted every civilization known to mankind. Okay. But we understand that slavery impacted melanated people just a little bit differently. Now, there are some things that you may know about slavery, but then again, it may be some things you might not know. So I want to read something that I thought would be beneficial to your ears. So to tell the story about kind of how we evolved or devolved into the people that we are right now in the United States of America and worldwide, to be honest with you. All right. So this is from the BBC. It's called The Story of Africa, which is addressing slavery. So let me read some things to you to see if this you've ever even heard of this before. The term slave has its origins in the word Slav. The Slavs, who inhabited a large part of Eastern Europe, were taken as slaves by the Muslims of Spain during the 9th century AD. Slavery can broadly be described as the ownership, buying and selling a human being for the purpose of forced and unpaid labor. It is an ancient practice mentioned in both the Bible and the Quran. All right. So slavery predated America. All right. I just want us to understand that. Okay. And it's so old that it's mentioned in biblical texts, it's mentioned in Quran. I imagine it's probably mentioned in more than just the Bible and Quran when it comes to ancient texts. All right. As for those of your slaves which wish to buy their liberty, free them if you find in them any promise and bestow on them a part of the riches which God has given you. That's the Quran, chapter 24, verse 32. Knowing that whatsoever good thing any man doth, the same shall he receive of the Lord, whether he be bond or free. That's in the Old Testament. Ephesians 6, chapter 6, verse 8. Okay. So there they're just giving you examples of, they're talking about slavery bondage in those books. Indeed, the main religious texts of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity all recognize slaves as a separate class of people in society. Going back further in time, the Mayans and Aztecs kept slaves in the American, as did the Sumerians and Babylonians in the Near East. The Egyptian employs huge numbers of slaves, including the Jews, Europeans, and Ethiopians. Now, it's even said that the slaves actually worked on the great monuments that could be found throughout Egypt. Some people believe that, some people question that. Um, like I said, I would need to do more research on that to give you a definitive yay and nay. So I'm just putting it out there that that's what some people believe. The Greeks and Romans kept slaves as soldiers, servants, laborers, and even civil servants. The Romans captured slaves from what is now Britain, France, and Germany. Slave armies were kept by the Ottomans and the Egyptians. In Imperial Russia in the first half of the 19th century, 1/3 of the population were serfs, who, like slaves in America, had the status of chattels and could be bought and sold. They were finally freed in 1861 by Emperor Alexander II. 4 years later, slavery was abolished in the southern states of America following Southern defeat in the American Civil War. In Africa, there was a number of societies and kingdoms which kept slaves before there was any regular commercial contact with Europeans, including the Ashanti and the kings of Bani and Dahomey. Okay, so slavery as an institution existed for a very long time. Okay, now yes, when it came to America, did it change and look different? Absolutely. That is the story of melanated people. Okay, now it talks about in Africa how they kept slaves even before the African slave trade, right? But it looked a little bit different. That's what we want to touch on next. All right. So let's keep moving. Many societies in Africa with kings and hierarchy forms of government traditionally kept slaves, but these were mostly used for domestic purposes. They were an indication of power and wealth and not used for commercial gain. However, with the appearance of Europeans desperate to buy slaves for use in America, the character of African slave ownership changed. Okay. So Africans kept other Africans. You got to remember, Africans were tribal based, right? So if they defeat another tribe, then they would take those women and children as slaves. Okay. But it was more for power, right? Chores and things of that domestic labor. Okay. In the early 18th century, kings of Dahomey, known as Benin, became big players in the slave trade, waging a bitter war on their neighbors, resulting in the capture of 10,000, including another important slave trader, the king of Ouida. King Tebesu made 250,000 pounds a year selling people into slavery in 1750. King Gizu said in the 1840s he would do anything the British wanted him to do apart from giving up slave trade. The slave trade is the ruling principle of my people. It is the source and glory of their wealth. The mother lulls the child to sleep with notes to triumph over an enemy reduced to slavery. So with this, they're saying once Europeans get involved and they see how Europeans was kind of like that person who bought a business and magnified it. Okay. So as Africans, they use slaves for domestic chores, not necessarily wealth, right? It was seen as someone having status and wealth, But Europeans came and they commercialized it. All right. That was the difference. And they use Africans to kind of exploit not only other Africans, but also exploit the fact that they can toil and work hard in very humid conditions. This is what we got to understand. This is the story of melanated people. Okay. Being a part of the slave trade and being a part of the slave trade, if that makes sense. Let's keep reading. Some of the descendants of African traders are alive today. Muhammad Ibrahim Babatu is the great great grandson of Baba Batu, the famous Muslim slave trader who was born in Niger and conducted his slave raids in northern Ghana in the 1880s. Muhammad Ibrahim Babatu, the deputy head teacher of a junior secondary school in Yende, lives in Ghana. And it's one more thing I want to read to you guys. And that is this. Before the 16th century, slavery was not regarded by anyone outside or inside Africa as a particularly African institution. The association between Africa and slavery emerged in the 15th century. It was then the ship design made it possible for sailors from the Mediterranean to make long journeys down the coast of Africa and ultimately across the Atlantic to the Americas. So when the 1400 came, it totally changed how not only Africans viewed each other in the continent, but how Europeans viewed Africans. Because before that point, we know the Moors were running Europe. We know of the kingdoms in Africa. They had all the gold, Mansa Musa, right? Of course, we know of ancient Egypt, which is called Kemet. In Mali and all the other great empires in Africa. See, this is the story. And this is where the story flipped in the 1400s. And slavery was a huge part of that. Let me read a little bit more before we move on. By the time the slaves reached the coast, they had already undertaken a long journey from inland. They were often bought and sold 7 times along the way. Many of these transactions were conducted in the marketplace. The Portuguese were particularly keen to explore Africa for wealth and material gain. At the same time, they had started up colonies in the Americas and needed labor to work on plantations there. In the 1440s, Africans were captured and taken to Portugal. 52 years later, in 1492, the Italian adventurer Christopher Columbus made the first of his visits to the Caribbean, arriving somewhere near the Bahamas. His aim was to gain wealth for himself and his patrons. Now, see, once it became about money, that's when everything changed. And who did they use for his main source of labor? Africans. And at that time, we was considered Africans. Hey, and that's where we're going to end on that, because we're going to move to our next piece of evidence to continue to tell you about the story of melanated people. All right, so my next piece of evidence for the story of melanated people, in my last piece I left off with talking about how we were once African and everything changed, which that is true. But I want to say this as well, that African is a very broad term, right? At one point we were called Ethiopians, right? There are various different names that we have been called, right? But African is a very broad and general term that we typically use because we call the continent Africa, right? And until something changed, that's kind of what we got to go with, right? But in this piece of evidence, what I want to do is I want to show you the different terms that we have been called, and in particular in the United States of America, right? So I want to show you a succession or a brief breakdown of the terms that melanated people have been called throughout our history, right? And we're gonna keep this very brief. Like I said, we can definitely draw this out, but I just want to give you just a brief breakdown of these terms to kind of make you aware of this is a part of our story, right? So let's get into it. So, African. The term African is helpful if searching a collection of North American sources from the 18th and 19th centuries up until about 1816. African Americans referred to themselves as Africans. Okay. With the founding of the American Colonization Society, which sought to forcibly export Black people from the United States to Liberia and other African countries, Black Americans abandoned the term which associated them most closely to that continent and their heritage. Right? So, melanated people abandoned the term Africa back in the 19th century. Okay? Keep that in mind. I want to skip free African and go to African American. Currently, the first known appearance of the term African American is in 1782 sermon written by the self-named African American. The identifier was not a popular one, however, and did not gain prominence until civil rights activist Minister Jesse Jackson pushed for its adoption and uses in the 1980s as alternate to Black. Isabel Wilkerson writes the embrace of the term represented to some African Americans that they are accepting their difficult paths and resolving a long ambivalence toward Africa. This shift hoped to change associations from racial identifier to a culture and ethnic identity. In other words, Wilkerson wrote, there is a feeling that African Americans sometimes convey a significance that Black cannot. There was not universal acceptance, however. Some say they do not identify with African and resent prominent Blacks telling them what to be called. Now, I get that sense right now, right? I don't think that a lot of people use the term African American. Most people call themselves Black, even though Black is not a political status. Okay, that'll be another great video for us to make the case on. But let me not digress. So there is this kind of sense of, and to be honest with you, I don't think a lot of melanated people have this sense because a lot of melanated people don't know the history, right? So, but for those intellectual and those who are kind of abreast and aware of what happened to us in Africa, how we was taken from our homeland and brought to America, that I guess they feel like Africans were responsible, and rightfully so, because in many cases that is true, right? So now we can see how we get called African American, how that came about. All right, let's keep reading. Let's go to the Negro. With a capital N was reclaimed and became popular in the early 20th century, especially among Northern African Americans and Black leaders such as Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. Uncapitalized, the term has been used by both white people and Black people since the 18th century. All right. Colored, that's another term we have been called here in the United States of America. This was a dominant term throughout the second half of the 19th century, allegedly accepted by both white people and the African Americans. It fell from popular use with the rise of the term Negro, which seen to Black leaders as a more specific word that fostered group identity. Then you have people of color, right? This term had been used since 19th century by both African Americans and white people. But in describing archive, this should be avoided when specifically writing about Black people, unless referencing a context in which it was historically used, just as a Cuban gente de color. Okay. So what I want to show you is there has been many names that melanated people have been called throughout the history, but mostly in America, right? Because we know in Africa, we're more broken down by, we're tribal people, right? So we Igbo and things of that nature, right? So this is more so speaking of to the United States of America. But as you can see, there has been an evolution, right, of terms and identifiers and what we accepted to be called to now, if you call somebody a Negro or colored, that will be considered disrespectful, right? Whereas African American or black is more acceptable. And maybe one day those terms will not be acceptable, but for now they are. Okay. Now, let's move on to a word that was not acceptable, but unfortunately has turned into more of a colloquial use by melanated people. And I'm pretty sure you know what that word is. All right. So let's get to it. All right. So, following the train of logical thinking with our evidence, kind of the story of melanated people. Let's kind of recap. All right. So we talking about the different terms that we've been identified. We talk about slavery and had a big, huge impact how we was identified and how we were looked at. Right. Now there has been one very powerful word in our history that one could say has defined us, or one could say has definitely have emotional ramifications on us. And I will go ahead and say this. I am going to use the actual word. This is for learning purposes and context only, because I think it would be kind of silly just to keep saying the N word. And this and this is how powerful this word is, right? The fact that we got to say, do we say it or do we not say it, right? We know nowadays, we know are not only are young melanated people using this word, we have people of all different ethnicities and races using this word without understanding the context and the history behind it. Okay. So I found an article from Smith Scholar Works titled Etymology uh, Etymology of Nigger, Resistance, Language, and the Politics of Freedom in the Antebellum North. Okay. So let's read, and it's, of course, it's 45 pages. Once again, I'm not going to read it all to you, but there are pieces of it that I want to point out to you, though. All right. So let me get to it. All right. In 1837, Hosea Easton, a black minister for Hartford, Connecticut, one of the earliest black intellectuals to write about the word nigger. In several pages, he documented how it was an omnipresent reframe in the streets of Antebellum North, used by whites to terrorize colored travelers. Now, see how they use colored and nigger and black people already, right? Which is part of the reason why we don't know who we are. We don't even know what we answer to. All right, let's keep reading. Uh, a term that elite African Americans with the financial ability and personal inclination to travel use to describe themselves. On reflecting upon the ways that the word nigger impacted colored travelers, Easton painted a picture of an urban landscape in which little urchins of Christian villagers pestered black men and women as they passed. He said white parents and teachers used the word to instruct children that blacks were deficient, but also to show how their own racial status were precarious. They disciplined white children with stories of nigger boogeyman and promised a child will have no more credit than a nigger if she misbehaved. Children absorbed their racial lessons and reacted with open hostility when they saw real black people. White children taunted, see niggas thick lips, see his flat nose, nigga eye shine, that slick looking nigga. Nigga, where you get so much coat? That's a nigga's priest. As he moved throughout the North, Easton experienced a cacophony of children's voices that continually infested the feeling of colored travelers, like the precarious breath of young devils. And white adults were heard to join in the concert. That same year, a white abolitionist concurred and highlighted how whites deployed the word nigger to hamper black mobility. Known that if a nigger walked the street, he was often hailed by men and boys with cuff a nigger or the like. Now, I know that was a lot, okay? But now you can see how literally one word can not only define a man or a woman, but used to destroy, tear down, depreciate, devalue a human being. Let's keep reading. In the antebellum United States, colored travelers were acutely aware that travel at home, not the houses in which they live, but the streets, towns, and cities they traverse, was fundamentally inhospitable. Going out in public meant confronting the verbal assault, nigger. This single word, nigger, captured the magnitude of anti black feeling and was unleashed upon free people as they moved through urban space, rode public vehicles, and even ventured abroad. For free African Americans, independent travel within their hometown and beyond was stressful, dangerous, and sometimes deadly. The ambiguity of the word nigger illuminated the limits of their freedom. Despite the fact that by 1800, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts were ostensibly free states, and between 1780 and 1804, New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey passed a series of gradual abolition laws to end enslavement. The institution still left an indelible mark in the region. Without the racial control that slavery ensured, anti-black violence increased in the 1820s North. Prior to the 1770s, the labels nigger and slave were interchangeable. The label nigger and slave were interchangeable. Being called black or colored was just a step up. But regardless of what they called you, they still felt the same about you. So how do we feel like this calling ourselves this word is endearment? I disagree. Let's keep reading. I don't want to read much actually because I think I'm hitting my point. Let's see. Each describing an actual social category of involuntary black laborers. As African Americans became free in the North, however, nigger latched on like a shackle. White Americans of all classes and ages hissed out the word, branded free black people as foul-smelling, unproductive, licentious, and unfit for self-rule. By the 1820s, blackness, not slavery, marked people of color as occupying a fixed social class. So whether it was black, colored, Negro, nigger, it was like a scarlet letter. That is the story of melanated people, particularly in North America. Let's keep reading. Most significantly, the word nigger became a slur in conversation with black social aspiration. In the early 19th century, a small but influential black middle class, a group characterized by education and activism, not necessarily prosperity, began to defy their prescribed roles as laborers. They asserted their right to equal access to the goods and services designed for public consumption, including entree into vehicles of transportation, theaters, taverns, and inns. To prevent such freedom of mobility, nigger emerged as a weapon of racial containment, a barometer against which to measure the increasingly rigid boundaries of whiteness and the mechanism used to police and clean public space. And that is a great way to stop, or a great place to stop, I should say. So the word nigger was used to contain black people gaining more rights and more freedom. And to say, hey, remember your place, nigger. This is the story of melanated people. Slavery, nigger, black, negroid. This is our story. Okay? Which it makes sense why the word black did emerge, right? Black power to combat white power. Which is why I think a lot of melanated people feel comfortable with calling themselves black. And as of date of doing this video, I feel more compelled to call myself a person of a melanated person. Because although it doesn't denote a political status, it denotes what I am and who I am. But the issue we've had as melanated people is we don't know who we are, particularly as we was drove by the millions out of a landmass that many of us called home. Yes, we were scattered throughout out the world, but many of us call Africa home. This one word did so much damage to the melanated people's psyche. That one word. And now we're using that one word and we're replacing two letters with one and think it's supposed to mean pride. We have no identity. We lost it a long time ago, which is the reason why you can see melanated people, particularly here in the Western Hemisphere, are so lost, are so traumatized, are so damaged. And a lot of it due to the story that I've been painting for you. We got one more piece of evidence and we're going to wrap it up. All right. So to wrap up this episode, this last piece of evidence is going to sting a little bit. But I feel like you needed to hear this. Because it's going to make a lot of sense to you once we get to the end. Okay. I'm sure many of you have heard of the Willie Lynch letters, the making of a slave. If you haven't, well, you're definitely going to hear now. And so I pulled up some excerpts from the Willie Lynch letters. And this is from a platform called The Final Call. And it's going to make a lot of sense once we get through. So let's get to it. So this speech was said to have been delivered by Willie Lynch on the bank of the James River in the colony of Virginia in 1712. Lynch was a British slave owner in the West Indies. He was invited to the colony of Virginia in 1712 to teach his methods to slave owners there. So Willie Lynch was a person who was coming to train slave owners how to create better slaves. Just giving you the context there before we get into it. All right. So here we go. Greetings, gentlemen. I greet you here on the bank of the James River in the year of the Lord 1712. First, I shall thank you, the gentlemen of the colony of Virginia, for bringing me here. I'm here to help you solve some of your problems with slaves. Your invitation reached me on my most modest plantation in the West Indies, where I have experience with some of the newest and still the oldest methods for control of slaves. Ancient Rome would envy us if my program is implemented. As our boat sails south of the James River, named for our illustrious king, whose version of the Bible we cherish, I saw enough to know that your problem is not unique. While Rome used cords of wood as crosses for standing human bodies along its highways in great numbers, you are here using the tree and the rope on occasions. I caught the whiff of a dead slave hanging from a tree a couple miles back. You are not only losing valuable stock by hanging, you are having uprisings. Slaves are running away. Your crops are sometimes left in the fields too long for maximum profit. You suffer occasional fires. Your animals are killed. Gentlemen, you know what your problems are. Do not need to elaborate. I'm not here to enumerate your problems. I'm here to introduce you to a method of solving them. In my bag here, I have a foolproof method for controlling your black slaves. I guarantee every one of you that if installed correctly, it will control the slave for at least 300 years. My method is simple. Any member of your family or your overseer can use it. I have outlined a number of differences among the slaves, and I take these differences and make them bigger. I use fear, distrust, and envy for control purposes. These methods have worked on my modest plantation in the West Indies and will work throughout the South. Take this simple list of differences and think about them. On top of my list is age, but there's only because it starts with the A. The second is color or shade. There is intelligence, size, sex, size of plantation status on plantations, attitude of owners, whether say live in a valley, on the hill, east, west, north, south, have fine hair, coarse hair, is tall or short. Now that you have a list of differences, I shall give you an outline of action. But before that, I shall assure you that distrust is stronger than trust and envy stronger than adulation, respect, or admiration. I'm hoping you're paying attention. The black slaves after receiving this indoctrination shall carry on. It will become refueling, and self-generating for hundreds of years, maybe thousands. Don't forget, you must pitch the old black male versus the young black male. The young black male against the old black male. You must use the dark-skinned slave versus the light-skinned slaves. And the light-skinned slave versus the dark-skinned slaves. You must use the female versus the male. And the male versus the female. You must also have white servants and overseers who distrust all blacks. But it is necessary that your slave trust and depend on us. They must love, respect, and trust us only. Gentlemen, these kits are your keys to control. Use them. Have your wives and children use them. Never miss an opportunity. If used intensely for 1 year, the slaves themselves will remain perpetually distrustful. I wonder what we see. Are melanated men against melanated women? Would we rather do business with people outside our culture? The list goes on and on. Let's keep reading. It was the interest and business of slaveholders to study human nature and the slave nature in particular, with a view to practical results. I and many of them attained astonishing proficiency in this direction. They had to deal not with earth, wood, and stone, but with men, and by every regard they had for their own safety and prosperity, they needed to know the material in which they were to work. Conscious of the injustice and wrong they were every hour perpetuating, and knowing that they themselves would do. Were they the victim of such wrongs? They were constantly looking for the first signs of the dreaded retribution. They watched, therefore, with skilled and practiced eyes and learned to read with great accuracy the state of mind and heart of the slave through his sable face. Unusual sobriety, apparent abstraction, subtleness, and indifference. Indeed, any mood out of the common was afforded ground for suspicion and inquiry. Frederick Douglass' Let's Make a Slave is a study of the scientific process of man breaking and slave making. It describes the rationale and the results of the Anglo-Saxons' ideas and methods of ensuring the master-slave relationship. Let's Make a Slave, the original and development of a social being called the Negro. Let us make a slave. What do we need? First of all, we need a black nigger man, a pregnant nigger woman, and her baby nigger boy. Second, we will use the same basic principle that we use in breaking the horse, combined with some more sustaining factors. What we do with horses is that we break them from one form of life to another. That is, we reduce them to their natural state in nature. Whereas nature provides them with the natural capacity to take care of their offspring, we break that natural string of independence from them and thereby create a dependency status so that we may be able to get from them unusual production of our business and pleasure. For fear that our future generation may not understand the principle of breaking both of the beasts together, the nigger and the horse, we understand that short-range planning, economic results, in periodic economic chaos. So that to avoid turmoil in the economy, it requires us to have breadth and depth and long-range comprehensive planning, articulate both skills, sharp perceptions. We lay down the following principle for long-range comprehensive economic planning. Both horse and niggers are no good to the economy in the wild or natural state. Both must be broken and tied together for orderly production. For orderly future, special and particular attention must be paid to the female and the youngest offspring. Both must be crossbred to produce a variety and division of labor. Both must be taught to respond to a peculiar new language. Psychological and physical instruction of containment must be created for both. We hold the six cardinal principles as truth to be self-evident based upon the following the discourse concerning the economics of breaking and tying the horse and the nigger together, all inclusive of the six principles laid down above. Now, I want to read this, and I might end off with this because I might end off with this. The breaking process of the African woman. Take the female and run a series of tests on her to see if she will submit to your desire willingly. Take her in every way because she is the most important factor for good economic. If she shows any sign of resistance and submitting completely to your will, do not hesitate to use a bullwhip to her to extract that last bit. Take care not to kill her, for in doing so, you spoil good economics. When in complete submission, she will train her offspring in the early years to submit to labor when they become of age. Understanding is the best thing. Therefore, we shall go deeper into this area of subject matter concerning what we have produced here in this breaking process of the female nigger. We have reversed the relationship. In her natural uncivilized state, she would have a strong dependency on the uncivilized nigger male, and she will have a limited protective tendency toward her independent male offspring and will raise male offspring to be dependent like her. Nature had provided for this type of balance. We reverse nature by burning and pulling a civilized nigga apart and bullwhipping the other to the point of death, all in her presence. By her being left alone, unprotected, with the male image destroyed, the idea caused her to move from her psychologically dependent state to a frozen, independent state. In this frozen psychological state of independence, she would raise her male and female offspring in reverse roles. For fear of the young male's life, she would psychologically train him to be mentally weak and dependent, but physically strong. Because she has become psychologically independent, she would train her female offspring to be psychologically independent. What have you got? You got the nigger woman out front and the nigger man behind and scared. This is a perfect situation of sound sleep and economics. Before the breaking process, we had to be alertly on guard at all times. Now we can sleep soundly, for out of frozen fear, his woman stands guard for us. He cannot get past her early slave molding process. He is a good tool, not ready to be tied to the horse at a tender age. By the time a nigger boy reaches the age of 16, he is silently broken in and ready for a long life of sound and efficient work and the reproduction of a unit of good labor force. Continually through the breaking of uncivilized savage niggas, by throwing the nigger female savage into a frozen psychological state of independence, by killing the protective male image, and by creating the submissive dependent mind of the nigger male slave, we have created an orbiting cycle that turns on its own axis forever. Unless a phenomenon occurs and resets the position of the male and female slave, we show what we mean by example. Take the case of two economic slave units and examine them close. I don't think we need to read anymore. Do you see the plan and how it's been implemented? And in 2024, we still executing? Because we're going to go ahead and get into my closing statement. Do you see what they've done to us melanated people? In particularly black people, African American, African, whatever you want to call yourself in this diaspora. Do you see the plan that has been outlined? And this is public knowledge. But it doesn't matter that it's public knowledge for people to be aware of, because the plan is still working. In 2024, black men and black women, melanated men and melanated women are against each other. All you hear is, I'm an independent, strong, independent woman. Psychologically, we've been hoodwinked. Males are painting their nails and wearing heels and wigs. Women are swinging on men and saying they don't need no man and cussing you out more than a male would. You destroy the family unit, you destroy the culture. On radio right now, Glorilla is the most played female artist. And I guarantee you, if you print out her lyrics and you read them to your child in a book, you wouldn't do it. This is a story of melanated people. And this is currently where we are. Now, I didn't give you an exhausted breakdown because that would have took way longer. I just gave you snippets and pieces that I just want you to see. We are in control of our image, our language, our culture, and what we do. But we've sold our soul a long time ago. So we can change our story. But the question is, do we want to? And how much will it cost us? So that is our episode for today, man. I hope that was valuable for you. I'm very passionate about what I do, as you can see. And so I thought this, episode needed to happen because, to be honest with you, um, I always bump episodes and topics up to the very top when I feel like there was of importance, and I just can't wait to do them because it's fresh on my mind. And this was one of those episodes. I just want melanated people, black people, African Americans, Africans, whatever you consider yourself. I want us to wake up. I really do. And so, whenever I can do content like this, to get it out there to the masses, for as long as I'm allowed to, you know, I feel like it's important to do so. Okay. But hey, that's the episode, man. As always, thank you for supporting me. Um, I couldn't do it, wouldn't do it without you. Okay. You already know the link's gonna be in the bio. We got the books, we got the merch, we got all that stuff. I am a relational and educational consultant. So the links will be in the bio if you want a one-on-one or couple session. Definitely hit me up at rcdconsultancy.com. Links will be in the description. All right. As always, I am you, you are me. Love always, love eternal, man. Remember, the worst thing you can do is lie to yourself. And I think we made that case, baby. All right. Deuces. One love.